Dr. al-Krenawi is president of Achva Academic College and professor of social work at Ben Gurion University of the Negev, and that's located in Beersheba, which is in the Negev of Israel. He is the former dean of the School of Social Work at Memorial University of Newfoundland, Canada, and he is the first non-Jew to be a president or be appointed head of an Israeli institution. So this is just a fabulous thing for Dr. al-Krenawi and for the entire country of Israel. Professor al-Krenawi's research interests include multicultural, mental health, political violence, and social work with indigenous population. He conducted studies in Israel, in Canada, the Palestinian Authority, and other Arab countries. Among his numerous publications are books on ethno-psychiatry among Bedouin Arabs in Israel, on multicultural social work in Canada, and on the psychological effects of political violence. Professor al-Krenawi is currently working on a book dealing with polygamy and mental health in the Middle East. The cornerstones of Professor al-Krenawi's educational visions are an emphasis on participatory instruction attuned to the needs of the student, applied research producing workable models for educational and practitioners, and engagement in the community by both students and faculty. It is with great, great pleasure that I introduce Dr. al-Krenawi.
Thank you very much. Really very exciting to be here in Nursing College. Before probably I started my presentation, I'm a Bedouin Arab who live in the Negev. Grew up in the Negev desert, as we call it. And one of the issues I'm trying to promote in Achva Academic College, since I've been there 2 years, the issue of diversity and multiculturalism. And I believe in inclusion. I believe that everybody needs to have a space and then this platform, which was allowing him or her to play on this platform. So that's why I met with several people, president of universities and colleges, and we're trying to initiate a conference, a major conference on the issue of diversity and multiculturalism. And hopefully, and I'm sure, I just met the president of Mercy College, and he's willing to join us, and I hope we will start this journey sometime soon. So thanks for the introduction, and I appreciate that very much. Now to the topic. Yes, one of my research areas is really political violence, and I did several studies among the Palestinian and Israelis. And because of my position, and I'm speaking as a scholar now, not as a president of a university or college. So I did actually several studies where I examined the impact of political violence on youth in both sides, in the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. There was a major studies, which is I published it as a book, Here Tomorrow Players, I call it, the Israeli-Palestinian case, where the sample, we had a sample from Gaza before Hamas took over, that was in 2006, West Bank, Israel, and even within Israel, you know, we had Arab Israelis, including the sample. And the data showed that these youth are suffering. Now, we are not in a position of blaming or who is fault, but definitely this book shows, and you can Google it, it's there these days, nothing you can hide in. It's there and tells you the data that both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, are suffering. So I'm going to raise a question to myself, what is our role as an academic, as people who are working in academia, academicians, politicians? Do we need to be part of creating a sick society? I mean health, in terms of mental health? Or do we need to do something? How we can bridge some gaps by bringing people together? To be honest, the data from this major study, which was funded by Ford Foundation back then, was not promising. That's true. The Palestinian reported more psychological and trauma, PTSD, compared to the Israelis, after all. But still, the youth from Sderot, which is close to Gaza, they reported a high PTSD because they are exposed to rockets. But also think back on the Gaza situations when they hit by F-16 or 17 or whatever it's called. What happened to these kids? And my question was to myself, if that's the case, maybe the politicians on both sides, they like the situation to leave the status quo as is. But what is our rule? As social workers, as practitioners, as educators, as a human being. And then building peace through knowledge actually derived from this research. I applied back then when I was a visiting scholar in Calgary. I applied for a major fund from USA, and this project, thanks to them, where to bring together, as you will see, practitioners, educators from both sides, Israelis and Palestinians. We can't bring people from Gaza since Hamas took over, but we are having people coming from the West Bank and from Israel, and even from the Israeli, participant. We have Arab Israeli. So building pieces through is about a 3 years project. The idea is to bring people together through dialogue. What I noticed actually, and this is a very interesting, before even we get into that, people that don't know each other. From both sides, there's a lot of stereotypes in both sides. And they hate each other. They don't want to talk to each other. The question is, if that's true, or that's the atmosphere, the political atmosphere which is created there. But when we started this project in collaborations with our partners, and from Bethlehem, Dr. Tawfiq Salman is a psychiatrist, we started to ask ourselves, who's going to join this project? And why people will show up and talk. And the first time when I met with the Palestinian side, and I asked them about joining this project, one of the teachers here from Jenin, he said something very interesting, and that was also while I was writing my book, so I used this, what he said. He said, I'm 40 years old, and I'm a teacher, but I never met Israeli teacher. In my class, I used to go daily to the school, and there is always an empty chair. I don't know what happened to that kid. Why he didn't show up? Is he killed? Is he jailed? Is something happened to his family? I don't know. But always, I had an empty chair in my class. And I would like very much to meet a teacher, a Jewish teacher from Sderot, or any village around Gaza, to talk to that Jewish teacher, how he handled the empty chair. And what is the meaning of empty chair in his class? And I'm sure there's also, I'm quoting, Israeli kid, he didn't show up to the school. And I want to know why. I never met with Israelis. I never talked to them. All I know about them, they're threatening me. They want to kill me, and I want to kill them. I say that's a lot. That's very interesting how These are the stereotypes, the atmosphere we are growing up. So the project was, to bring people, as here you can see here, together. But the idea is to bringing teachers, social workers, psychologists who are in the front line, who are dealing with people who are affected by the political violence, and to deal with that. The overall idea is, I never said we want to go there to blame each other. Your fault, my fault. You wrong, I'm right. No, we never went there. We brought in our experience, professional experience, and personal experience into that dialogue. The dialogue, people to people, the idea is to bring people to talk about their own experience of treating people, of dealing with people in the school system, and the welfare system, in the hospital. These are practitioners, trying always to bring their own experience and how that, affected their professional and personal. The knowledge I'm talking about, it's to share the knowledge. And the Palestinian knowledge different than the Israeli knowledge. The Israeli knowledge could be more a modern, global, and the Palestinian may be more traditional. But what I'm trying to say here, through this process, as you can see, sharing local knowledge and expertise in each community. I want to take it a little bit further here. What I used to say here in academia, after all, I'm a professor at university, there is a global knowledge and there is a local knowledge. The global knowledge shaped by theory, by research, which is we conduct and shape and come up with a body of knowledge. But the local knowledge derived from a cultural, religious, social, political situations we grow up. So the religion, the culture play a major role on shaping the local knowledge. So we notice through the dialogue that how the Palestinians dealt with the issue of death or bereavement, and soon you will see it here. These are some of the ideas, but the idea actually of how to, when we deal with trauma, bereavement, which is are some of the major themes we dealt with through the encounters. That's the global knowledge, where the Palestinians bring their own knowledge, their own experience, and the Israeli bring their own experience into dialogue. So the dialogue idea, the idea behind this was, it's never to blame each other. Let's bring our own professional and personal experience into a people-to-people idea, to a dialogue. And that's fitted with the whole project. So we had actually exchange knowledge, which is called KIF, were held over the course of 2 years, where we bring, Israelis, as I mentioned before, and before any meetings, often we had, mononational, before the binational, and then after the meetings, we have also a mononationals where people discuss, elaborate what happened during these meetings. One of the major topics we discussed through the 6 sessions or workshops for the 40 Israelis and Palestinians, and we often did that in a weekend. Actually, it's not quite a weekend, it's Thursday and Friday, because we are sensitive to the needs of the different populations among us. So often we met twice, 2 days. The workshop led by an expertise from abroad, and some of them sometimes Israelis, sometimes Palestinian as well, who were led these workshops. But the idea here, as you can see, the topics, the major topics, the trauma, forgiveness and reconciliation, bereavement, children, political violence, these are some of the themes we discussed. And we always look at the global and the local knowledge, and how, the practitioners, the human service providers, dealt with the issues. And we heard a lot of stories. Sometimes people brought their own stories and how they watched the children die. And when it comes to the issue of forgiveness and reconciliation, I used to say sometimes during this process, how you use the suffering, the pain, as a leverage for forgiveness. How you can forgive people when you are suffering. And that was a really very interesting story, if I recall. Behind the cultural, religious, political aspect which was there, shape these themes. There was also a woman, a Palestinian woman, when we talked about the process of forgiveness and reconciliation, and she said, I hesitated to participate in this workshop, but finally I decided, yes, I would like to be there. And I would like to confront the Jewish people and tell them my story. I didn't have a question, I didn't have an answer to my kids. But my father killed by the Israeli army. Listen to this carefully, please. My father killed by the Israeli army, and I decided to be here because I want them to hear my suffering. And I said to myself, it's about time to stop this project. My kids always ask me, where's Grandpa? And I have no question. I have no answer for them. But I decided to be here because I want to deliver this message. So this is the kind of people who really using the suffering, the pain as a leverage to move forward. A lot of the Jewish people around came and gave her a big hug because she's brave. Not everybody is willing to do so. The same, there's a lot of stories on the Jewish side and the Israeli side as well. So when we look at the issue of bereavement, we saw a lot of, religion and cultural aspect of that. And through that suffering, people communicate with each other. Sometimes personal, sometimes professional. Even the process of being together, the Israeli very much support the Palestinian people and help them to get in. Because we have a checkpoint. And the Palestinians, when they come to Jerusalem, we often meet in Jerusalem. They have to go through a lot of checkpoints. And sometimes it's not easy process, as you can imagine. A lot of the Israelis try to help, even though we ask for permissions from the army, etc., they're still facing a lot of difficulties. So, as you can see here, we try as much as we can, sometimes not to go to whose fault and why it's there. The idea here, as you can see here, through the 6 sessions of we call it the KIF, we discussed what I mentioned before, and there was a very interesting discussions by people who would love to know more. And a lot of Palestinians contacted and kept in touch with the Israelis, because after all, the system in Israel is way developed compared to the Palestinian people in the West Bank. And the Israelis provided them with a lot of support. How to deal with kids, how to work in different directions. But always the key, as I said before, where we looked for how through the personal and professional level, how that led to a discussion and a dialogue. And the key, I think, is, and I will get to that later on, is the discussion. As we can see here, for example, case studies and relations between bereavement and forgiveness in the local Israeli and Palestinian spheres, and we heard a lot of stories from both sides. We discussed also the case of Dr. Izzeddin, a Palestinian from Jabalia, from Gaza, where, and I think that was 2012, when he lost three of his, two or three, I don't know, I think two of his daughters. And that was a mistake. And the Israeli army said, well, that was a really mistake, our fault. But he lost two girls. And I know him personally. And now he lives in Toronto. And he started his journey by a book recently published. I don't hate. I don't hate. And I look for people to talk with them. So that are kind of, examples we discussed. But the idea is behind, in between case number 4 and 5, in addition to the way we try to develop a model of interventions based on the experience of the practitioners, which is there, which is very important, I came to the conclusion of people on both sides like very much to communicate, to talk. Through dialogue, you eliminate a lot of psychological barriers, the stereotypes. People are willing to know each other. But the ignorance in both sides makes the gap huge, because they don't want to talk to each other. They live with the stereotypes. What I thought of you, what I think of you, and the same the other side. And I think, let me put it this way in a nice way. The problem is not the people. People would love to talk to each other. And I think when we give them a platform to talk and to know each other. You know what, for example, in the last war, in the recent war, Palestinians from Bethlehem and from Ramallah called Jewish people in Sderot and in Dimona and everywhere who are part of this program. Are you okay? Everything's okay? We are sorry about what's going on. And sometimes the same. Israeli called the Palestinian. So we started here a dialogue. And there's a Facebook. People are communicate and share. And I think the idea of bringing people together is the key. The problem is, I think, is the culture of fear. The culture of fear, I think, could be pretty much supported by politicians. Because the culture of fear supports the politician, supports their own agenda. Now I'm speaking as a professor, right? That supports their agenda. Because the agenda, the Israeli agenda, is different than the people, what they think. And the same with the Palestinian side. The culture of fear, where both sides
trying to create an atmosphere of fear. They're gonna eat you alive. They're gonna kill you. And the same in both sides. I'm not, I'm in a neutral position in this case. That add a lot of trouble to the whole issue. So the culture of fear, I think it's a major problem here, and it's a very much what we noticed and what we came up through this project is the culture of fear which exists there, very much supported by the politicians and this by the people on both sides. People on both sides would love to talk and would love to meet. This project actually, the first part led us to the learning events where we have now stakeholders from both sides where we would like to have Palestinian Israelis, and they are very much empowered and they are meeting with each other, taking this one step further. We would like them to be ambassadors, to disseminate some of what we came up with during the last 2 or 3 years. We're still meeting, we're still talking, but the idea is to initiate a dialogue, and we came to the conclusion during the KIF that we probably about time to come up with a collective narrative of both sides. Instead of dividing Israelis and Palestinians, let's come up with a collective narrative where we can share the same collective narrative. And this is something they are really working on. As you see, again, during the the last two meetings where we brought in, Israelis and Palestinians, stakeholders, they are really in major positions, and they are stakeholders. They can take what we discussed and trying to take it one step further. As you can see here, what is the potential outcome of such a project? As you can see it last year, but I think the overall idea is by becoming an ambassador of this project and talking about this project and talking among your neighborhood or your people. It's more than that. That the dialogue, people to people, is a key throughout. Even when we discussed a lot of issues here in terms of forgiveness, trauma, name it, and we brought an excellent. Oh, by the way, this project funded by the USA. You won't see it. It's $1 million project. It costs a lot of money. That's why we bring these people together and take care of them for a weekend, etc. The major issue, I think, it's for me, is when these people became ambassador of this project, and they are keep talking and keep communicating with each other. And if I may say also, because of the psychological barriers, the gap is huge. People, they don't want to know each other, and here we gave them an opportunity to sit together and talk together, and through the knowledge and never go to your fault, my fault. Sometimes, yes, we talk some cases. There was a lot of workshops, brief presentations, but more of workshop. People want to talk. Sometimes you mix them together. Sometimes you separate them, and they would love to negotiate, talk about what's going on. As you can see here, again, we also trying to look at the informal meetings after every meeting. Sometimes, particularly during the night, they used to meet and talk. And one of the Israelis, he's from the Likud party, and he never met a Palestinian. And he was sitting with one of the physicians, Palestinian from Bethlehem, and that doctor was He's from Romania. No, the doctor actually, he studied in Romania. And that Jewish participant, Romanian, his background Romanian, and all of a sudden they start speaking Romanian. So they find something in common. And the whole issue of the Palestinian physicians was complaining about, it's a matter of water. He said, I need water. There's no running water in my village, and you give me sometimes water, you close the water, and I can't live this way. All I need is water. And all of a sudden that guy, he said, oh my God, all I thought about Palestinian terrorists, and here I'm sitting in front of me, a physician, he's a psychiatrist actually, and he's talking about water. And why I can't give him a water? Because I control the resources. And then through that dialogue, you see some shift, some change. So I think, if I may say that the informal part, and sometimes also the African drumming circle and dancing and a lot of activities behind the formal part of the project, is also strengthening the relationship between the both sides. And sure, again, as you can see, we always have an evaluation process. We are, running an evaluation process, and we are see that there is a really shift in the perceptions and attitudes of people toward others. Because when we measured that before, I don't have it here, people, they don't want to talk to each other. People think that's the Israeli are occupier, they are bad, and that's it. The Palestinian are terrorists. That's all I know about them. But when people get together and talk, by the end of the day, people change their attitudes and perceptions toward other. And I think this is one of the major accomplishments of this project. But as I said before, the idea of bringing people together and talking about how we can eliminate some of the stereotypes, some of the bad ideas we have toward others through the dialogue, which is we use in this case, which is this is a different project than the rest of project where you bring people to people. Here we brought the knowledge, the professional and the experienced knowledge into dialogue, and through that we really developed a model of intervention, which is really based on their experience. But that gave us, how people can interact and lead the dialogue. I want to go back a little bit to the culture of fear. When we started to talk about the culture of fear during this project, I think both sides, the Palestinian and Israelis, came to the conclusion, yes, there is a culture of fear. There is a culture of fear which is very much supported by politicians, and we are not part of it. So in other words, you can make peace between people, among people. People would love to talk and to meet each other, and sometimes you need to give them the platform to do so. But politicians, they have their own agenda. They have their own agenda, they can shift it. That the agenda will serve the politician, either Abu Mazen or Bibi, or Benjamin Netanyahu. They have their own agenda. So the question is, how we're gonna lead that issue? And by the end of the day, when I look at this project, I said to myself, part of our missions as academicians, as professionals, is probably bringing people to people, helping people to know each other. When you know others, you know yourself even better. But if you ignore and you live in ignorance, you will live with your own stereotypes which shape your behavior, attitudes, and perception of how to approach others. But we notice here through this project, we're still running. We have one more year because we stopped it because of the war. Yeah. Even in September when we had one of the meetings, people showed up. Because people want to talk. People want to deliver a message. And the question is always how to take that knowledge or message and to open it for a discussion workshop. People want to talk. And the problem is, as I said before, we need brave leaders. Otherwise, let me put it in a nice diplomatic way, both sides will be, part of creating a sick society. Because these people grow up in ongoing political violence. And there's a lot of studies conducted in the Middle East and everywhere showing that kids who grow up on ongoing political violence suffer psychologically. There's a lot of PTSD, and there's a lot of psychological problems within the family. We also notice there's also correlations between political violence and domestic violence, school violence. The whole community became violent. So there is a correlation. You can't separate that from what's going on. So by training or working with these people, I think we did something, at least by opening a dialogue. And this book actually, which as I mentioned before, Tomorrow Players, I gave it to Tzipi Livni, which is she's in charge of, she's one of the ministers in Israel. She's in charge of the negotiation with the Palestinian. And I sent it with the friends to Abu Mazen. I don't know what they can do with it, but at least I'm as a scholar, I saw it's fit to send this book to them. Because after all, these kids, we are in charge. Not in charge, we are responsible somehow. We feel some responsibilities toward these kids. And regardless if we talk about a Jewish or Muslim or Christian, a kid is a kid. And these kids, and both sides, don't get me wrong, grow up in a really, horrible situations. We just witnessed that a couple of months ago. I closed my college for 2 months. Nobody can attend because of the rockets. Everywhere. But also you can think about the other side, the kids. So that's the kind of problems we are facing, and definitely from a political perspective, we need a brave leaders who are willing to sacrifice their chair, if I may say it this way. When Sadat showed up to Israel, he knew that there's a price. When Rabin signed a contract with the Palestinian, he knew there's a price. So there's the leaders who are willing to pay their life for principles. And there are leaders who really want to keep their chair, hold it. They are not willing to leave it. So they can switch the agenda, the political agenda, to keep, serving them. When Sadat landed in Israel back then, he asked one of his advisors, what the Israelis say. He said, the Israelis said, he's great, he's a hero. He said, then we would have a peace, and we'll get Sinai back. What the hell, you just landed. You just, well, we'll see. And that's what happened. But on the other side, there was Begin, willing to go for that. So, to be honest, we're trying to do our best by bringing people together to build a different, atmosphere in our region. But the future, as I see it these days, is complicated and it's not promising. So the question is, we have to ask ourselves, where we're going from here. I'll leave it for your imagination. Thank you very much. Questions, comments?
We'll open it up to questions.
I was wondering whether or not you have done any work with those who are now communicating and see whether or not there can be a ripple effect to get to others that they know. And because I think that sometimes from the bottom up, you can create the change in
Yeah.
what politicians do.
Absolutely. Oh, this is a really a good question, with good comments, yes. First of all, they have a website, Facebook these days, and they are communicating, And you know what, I agree with you 100% because some of the Jewish people, for example, we have participants from Dimona, which is way far from Beersheba, and one of the participants, she's a social worker, and she said during Shabbat, around the table, that was our conversation. And she said, I'm became ambassador, a messenger of this mission. If everybody's talking, that's then kind of spread that a little bit. But yes, I agree. In principle, it comes from down there, but it's a way to go. It needs a lot of work.
Well, good luck with the project.
Thank you.
Thank you, first of all, this is a great project. I would like to learn a little bit more about the language used or languages used from the selection to later to Facebook.
Yeah, the official language was English, but we have simultaneous translations, Arabic and Hebrew.
We took some of our students, some of whom were in this room, to Israel and Palestine last year, and one of our visits was the Achva Institute of the Environment. We're well familiar with their program, where they're using environmental degradation as a common enemy to bring people together in workshops of reconciliation to solve a specific problem. I'm curious, when you said in this $1 million project, one of the outcomes was a Palestinian-Romanian doctor who said, we have no running water, and then the other said, we control the water. Whether one of the outcomes is any kind of intervention to work on water reclamation. Does the KEF lead to an actual, let's work on solving a problem that is an existential problem that helps spark political difficulty? Or does it just become dialogue that then has to go to a minister or some politician to then solve? Where does the nexus between the problem solving and the dialogue?
That's a really good question. Yeah, when they raised that and we discussed that, they decided to write a letter to the Ministry of Energy in Israel. And that guy, he's from the Likud, he said he will take it over. And sometimes, you leave it to them. You don't want to intervene in every step. But I know sometimes if in the Facebook, they discuss that a lot. And maybe there's an initiative will come out of that. But definitely for me, I mean, it's for that guy from the Likud, his name is Shimon, for example, that was really a major shift in his life because he never thought about it. And even as she said, if he start to do something or to talk to, to his people or his family, that's an achievement as well. It's a process, it takes time, but at least in terms of being sensitive to the needs of others and why I control and why I should control the water. Why I can't give you water? You are a human being and all you're asking for is just water. I mean, why not?
I'm just curious about the structure and the agenda of the actual caves. So what I mean by that is you said that so much of it is based on exchange of stories between people. So I wanted to ask you, in what form do these stories take? All right, and who selects the people that are presented? If you have 100 stories to present, you have to pick it.
They use.
And is it through talking? Is it through dialogue? Is it through? It's simply each person has a chance to speak, and they simply speak.
We break them off of the tables to workshops during the workshop, and they decided who's going to speak and what's the topic they're going to raise through the table. we are not intervening in that, so we allow them to.
And there's
to lead that.
there's facilitators that
Yes.
record and
Yeah.
that do all this
Yes.
logistical.
Yes,
work.
absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much for the chat. It was very interesting. My question has to do with your point about culture of fear. Given that this culture of fear produces millions of dollars in revenues and some politicians write off of it for their own personal agendas,
Agenda.
how can, with a year left of this project, how can you go around this culture of fear and broaden this project to a larger scale?
You know, it's a really long way to go. It's a long way to go, you know. Culture of fear, as when we came up with that term, culture of fear, which is very much supported by the politicians, but not by the people. The people are different. The people would like to see change. In Israel, for example, you know, and the Palestinian side, they agree in principle that that's the directions politicians should take, and we shouldn't follow that direction. I hope there will be more, let's say, continue of such a project in Israelis, Palestinians. By knowing that the politicians leading that to their own directions or their own agenda, in Israel it may make a difference. Because we are a democratic country and people vote. I don't know for the time being about the Palestinian side. But that itself can make a difference for time being. I know there is a lot of need for bringing people together from both sides and to continue to do so, because this is the way to, you know, changing perception, attitudes, etc. And when you say that all of them bad, I don't agree with you, because you are generalized. You want me to vote for you because that serves your own agenda. But based on my experience, the same with Shimon. Well, he is a Likud, and I don't know what happened to this guy, because he said, I'm confused, and that's fine. That's what he said, I'm quoting, I'm confused. What I believe is this way. And all of a sudden, you know, I'm meeting people and talk to people. For God's sake, he speaks the same language I speak, and he shares the same culture I share, etc. I never met a Palestinian, so for me, this is the first time. And this is the same with that physician. So it takes time, and it's a process. And I agree in principle, there's more of a need for such projects. It's a, what's it called in Hebrew, it's a little drop in the big sea, but you have to start it from there. And again, as I said before, these are ambassadors of this project. And that's why in the learning events, we are picking people who really stakeholders in major positions. For example, you know, some of them are general directors, etc. So they have more power and more impact.
I believe there are several projects like yours regarding peace and reconciliation and all that. Is there any effort to bring all those projects together and begin a larger movement towards that?
There's not much actually. Bear in mind, you know, it's complicated, by the way, to bring Palestinian and Israelis together. It's not an issue. It's not a you know, small issue. It's a simple issue. I'm an Arab, and I'm a Muslim, so I know how both cultures. So I can't play, you know, the rule by mediating between both sides. So what I can do, maybe a Jewish professor can do, because of my, you know, position, being known both cultures, and could be here, could be there, but a Jewish professor, I doubt it if he doesn't can do it, because there is among the Palestinian people you know, a lot of people against normalizations with Israeli people. And they don't want to collaborate with Israeli. In particular these days after the war now. So my position is to put me in a different situation. But there's not much collaborations between the Israelis and Palestinians. Yes, please.
I was just thinking, when we were talking about politicians, what do you think about the current situation today with like the Netanyahu and the Hamas? And do you think, is there any hope, or do you think like it needs to be like a regime change in both camps too?
Yeah. I mentioned that in a diplomatic way, we need brave leaders. We need brave leaders. And I gave you an example of Rabin, Sadat, Begin, who are willing to go way far, and not to keep their chair. No, I don't want to lose my chair. I don't want to lose my chair. We're willing to pay their life. But to save others' lives. If you care about your chair, you're never gonna do anything. And in both sides, these days, you know, there's a lot of questions in both sides, in the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. What's next? What's next? So what? We're gonna wait for a year and a half, and start another round of war, or we're going to initiate something. We're going to lead something. We're going to start something different. But that's not me and not you. That's in their hands. And they're willing to go one step further. Hamas is problematic. We all understand that. But still, somebody needs to beat that.
We'll take one more question, and then we'll have the reception, and during the reception, we will have the opportunity to have further discussion with
Yes, please.
Dr. Al.
What is the youngest audience that you've told about this project? Like before you, have you ever explained this to children, or like a younger audience, than college students?
Well, we discussed that about that at Ben Gurion University, you know, with the students, in the Palestinian age as well. Oh yeah, I mean, there is students actually participated from Al-Quds University, from Berzeit University at the beginning when we started. Yeah, I mean.
So you've spoken to, let's say, for example, junior high school children who are between the ages of.
No, we don't.
No, is that too young to try to explain to them?
Not too young to explain it, but because here actually we've tried to focus on professionals.
Yes.
Educators, social workers, psychologists, physicians who are in the front. They are dealing with the people who are affected by the political violence. So they know the knowledge, they have their own knowledge how to deal with that, but have their own personal.
In the beginning, when you first began to speak, you said that this affects the young.
That's my research.
And do you believe that trying to convey forgiveness, that to get them to understand forgiveness at a young age, they will become the leaders the brave leaders that you talk about? Do you believe that starting at a younger age than the college students?
Yes.
And do you believe that I know it will be difficult to try to implement
Not to
that.
such a project, but to bring people together. Let's say if I have the ability or the time to bring Palestinian and Israelis together, absolutely that's the age should start, even from kindergarten.
Yes.
Because this way you will grow up knowing each other, not afraid of each other.
Yes.
But that's a big project, and definitely even, we try, for example, to promote that within Israel, where we bring Jewish and Arab together.
Okay.
Because there is a gap, there's a huge gap there, and you can't take even the culture of fear, what I mentioned before, implement that in Israeli society, because people, they don't know each other. For example, the major Israeli society, how they approach the Ethiopian, and they also the Jewish. There's a lot of Jews. That's why we try to promote the conference of diversity, to respect and accept others, respect and accept. And respect and accept comes from knowing each other, not ignoring each other. Ignoring add a lot of stereotypes, and that shape my perception, my attitude, and my behavior toward it. Thank you very much.
I just want to add something. Last week in New York City, there was a film festival. It was called the Other Israeli Film Festival. I don't know if any of you saw it. Usually you see the Israeli Film Festival about Israeli movies. And the purpose of that film festival was to show movies that dealt with topics similar to what we heard today. The movie that I saw was called Becoming Friends. And I won't tell you the whole story because you can probably find it online. But it was produced and directed by an Israeli and an Arab. And basically it was about junior high school students, are you familiar with the movie? Who met each other online by emailing to each other. The Arab students lived in Lud, which is near Ben Gurion Airport. The religious Jewish students lived up north. They communicated for a couple of months through email and became really close friends, met each other face to face, and it was just a beautiful movie. I won't tell you the end because I'm going to see if I can bring it here. Also, in New Hampshire, every summer there's a camp where they bring Israeli Jewish children and Israeli Arab children together for a month. And they work on similar projects, and it's
that's
just
something
amazing.
So that's something, for example, within Israel, that's within our hand. You can do that. For example, as a president, I said very clear, I would like to see our Jewish and Bedouin students volunteer in the Jewish settlement, the same in the Arab cities. This way, you will help them overcome these stereotypes. The gap is coming from ignorance. And we, as a policymakers, as practitioners, and whatever, in our position, we should help people getting together. And I think this is a key. This is a key, and this is what I'm trying to lead in Achva Academic College. It takes time, but at least now that I'm under the, behind the steering, I can shift it to the way I would like to see it, and hopefully to see more and more people going this way.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing your expertise and your friendship to Mercy College. And just as a little token, I'd like to give you this little present. And we'll have a Middle Eastern reception with falafel and Israeli salad. And so, come on up, Ben.